This is Bill Newman, WHMP.
And this is Buz Eisenberg sitting in for Bill Newman. And happy to be here with, I'm excited about our guest who's sitting in studio. It's Nina Kleinberg. Good morning, Nina.
Good morning.
It's nice to meet you. We've just met. Nina, you are involved in a series at Amherst Cinema, and you are going to be giving a talk on August 22nd. And that talk is going to involve the House On-American Activities Committee, I think from the early 50s, probably 1954, I'm thinking, because I looked at, I read about the movie that you're talking about, and the Blacklist and the Hollywood 10. And the Blacklisted movie was called Salt of the Earth, about some really dreadful events that took place in I think a zinc mine. And so talk to us.
Hi, I'm a volunteer at Amherst Cinema, and I've been doing a series of talks this summer called Film School in 60 Minutes. We've already had one talk about Singin' in the Rain, which talked about the momentous transition from talkies, from silent films to talkies, and what that did to the industry. Then I gave a talk about Casablanca, where we talked about film craft, how films are shot and lit and edited and sound is added. This talk on Saturday is about film politics. And it talks about a film called Salt of the Earth, not the one that recently came out, which was The Salt of the Earth, and played very successfully at Amherst Cinema. This film was made in 1954. But the story behind this film, how it was made, who made it, why it was made, and how the Hollywood establishment and the government actively worked to suppress this film is at least as interesting as the movie itself.
Sure is. So talk to us about the movie.
The movie dramatizes a strike that took place in the early 50s in a very small town in Grant County in southwest New Mexico. It was a strike that was organized by a union called the Mine Mill and Smelters Worker, Local 890, and this was a union that had been so adamant in its demands that it was actually kicked out of the CIO for communist infiltration, or so they say.
Or so they say.
Of course, this was during the Red Scare. So one part of the story that I tell on Saturday is the story of this incredible strike. You talked about horrific incidents, but the truth is what happened during this strike was incredible. The zinc mine owners tried to pit the Anglo miners versus the Chicano miners, the Mexican-American miners, and they were very successful as long as they could pit these two factions against each other.
Fighting for their livelihood and their families.
Exactly. Divide and conquer. And the union sent in a union organizer, Clinton Jenks, and he worked very closely with the Chicano miners and the Anglo miners to make them understand that they were in that fight together. So after a very long struggle on the picket line, strike breakers, the mine owners finally got an injunction against the strikers. And the injunction said, striking miners may not be on the picket line. They thought it was the end. And instead what happened was the women in the community, the women who knew nothing about unions, about organizing, they were mostly at home taking care of the kids. The women got together and said, this injunction does not cover us.
We're speaking with Nina Kleinberg, who is going to be giving a talk about this incredible movie and about those times on August 22nd at Amherst Cinema. Nina, I watched the beginning of the movie, and I was so moved because Esperanza, what's her last name? Quintero. Esperanza is the narrator, and at least in the beginning, I got interrupted and didn't see the full movie. But she starts with this. She said, I want to tell you the beginning of a story that has no beginning. I thought that was just a very powerful lead in, and really it took me about 30 seconds of watching before I was hopelessly saddened by what I was seeing.
Hopelessly saddened, and yet it's very engaging and inspiring, because the women said, we're going to take over the picket line. And the men said, no, they're going to beat you. You're going to run as soon as the sheriffs come out. And the truth was, the women took over the picket line. And they did get beaten, and they held the line. They were jailed. They went to jail with their kids, and they held the line. So that's one part of the story, and that's the strike in the early 50s. But how did this end up on film? And that's the other part of the story. And that goes back to HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, which actually was founded in the 40s.
Right.
We had been, let's go back to the 30s, and the people who came from New York and founded in Hollywood the Directors Guild of America, the Screenwriters Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, they brought a left-wing sensibility and unionism out to Hollywood. And this was anathema to the Hollywood moguls. So when the war was over and they had a chance to throw these unions under the bus, they did a very good job of it. When the House Un-American Activities started looking for red subversion in Hollywood, the moguls were more than happy to deliver up to them all of the troublemakers who had founded these unions. Men like John Howard Lawson, Dalton Trumbo, Ring Lardner Jr., and a list of other people you've never heard of because they did lose their careers.
Right.
These men were called on to testify in Washington and essentially asked, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party, and who else was in it? First of all, it was not illegal to be in the Communist Party, but that didn't matter. Secondly...
Doesn't matter to Fox News either.
So they started off, the first round of people started off by pleading the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, whatever. That got them nowhere. They were cited for contempt of Congress. 11 of them were cited for contempt of Congress, but the reason they're called the Hollywood 10 was the 11th was Bertolt Brecht. He took one look at what was happening. He knew they were going to jail, and he left the country. Yeah. The other 10 eventually, after appeals to the Supreme Court, ended up going to jail for contempt of Congress. But they were not the only people who were blacklisted. Hundreds of actors and writers and producers, anyone with any suspicion of communist activity or trying to get a communist message into the movies, was blacklisted.
I'm starting to get a sense of why it's called Film School in 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very edifying, your explanation of the times.
So how do these two events come together? There are several of these blacklisted filmmakers who decide we don't need Hollywood. We're going to put together our own independent company and make movies of social significance. And they were very influenced by the Italian neorealists, like the people who did Open City and Bicycle Thieves, and people who were telling stories with real people about the problems of real people. So there was a chance meeting between Paul Jarrico, who ended up being the producer of the movie, and Clinton Jenks, who was the organizer from Mind Mill. They happened to be at the same ranch together. And as soon as Jarrico heard about the story of the strike, he said, this is it. This is the story we need to tell. It is about class, it's about race, it's about unions, and it's about women. It had everything. So the decision was made that they would make this movie that you're going to see on Saturday the first production of the Independent Producers Company.
Well, I'll be there. Although, I got to admit, I'm so ignorant that much of the story you just told, I know nothing about. And I wonder how many of the listeners who love film and who go to Amherst Cinema regularly and are members of Amherst Cinema are in the same boat that I'm in.
That's why I'm hoping people will come to the talk and not just the movie, because there is so much history involved in how this film came to be, but we're not even at the most exciting part, which is everything the government and Hollywood did to suppress this film.
So how, Nina Kleinberg, did this film get suppressed?
You got an hour? No.
We could take a break and come back and hear how it got suppressed.
There we go. Monty, you're a good guy.
This is Bill Newman, WHMP.
And this is Buz Eisenberg speaking with Nina Kleinberg. Happy to be here speaking with Nina Kleinberg about the talk she's going to give on August 22nd at Amherst Cinema about the dreadful times of the House Un-American Activities Committee. And before we broke, I asked you the question, how did Salt of the Earth, this movie you've just described, come to be suppressed?
While the filmmakers were working with the union to develop this film, somebody in the town wrote to Walter Pidgeon, who was head of the Screen Actors Guild, and said, commies have come to New Mexico and they're stirring up race trouble. Walter Pidgeon told his representative in the House of Representatives, and Donald Jackson, who was the representative, stood up in Congress and said, not only are the commies infiltrating New Mexico, but they're doing it right next to the Los Alamos Proving Grounds. They're doing it right near where we're developing the bomb. You know the commies are making this movie to try to get the bomb. I mean, the most absurd story you can think of. But so it was on Hollywood's radar, and it was on government's radar.
It sounds a little bit like 2015, like, our national security requires that we suppress this film.
They did everything. First, they tried silly stuff like they'd fly airplanes over so you couldn't record sound. They had the local goons come and say, get out of Dodge in one day or you're all going to be dead. They actually rounded them up in a shed at one point and were going to kill them. And only with the intercession of the governor and the state guard did they all not end up dead on this ranch. Then the government comes in and they says, well, we'll put the kibosh on this. And they deported the lead actress.
Oh, man.
In the middle of shooting, they deported Rosario Revueltas back to Mexico. And they thought, well, they've just lost their lead actress.
She was trumped.
Well, you can call it that. There was no wall, but there was an effective wall there. So even then, and I'll show you in the talk how they got around the fact that they lost their lead actress in the middle of shooting. That should have put the end on it, but it didn't. So Roy Brewer, who was head of the company union IATSE, which basically controlled all the technicians in Hollywood, put out the word and said, anybody or any company that works on this film will never get business again. So suddenly, no one would develop the film. No one would supply editing facilities. No one would process the sound. I mean, it was a complete conspiracy. And yet I tell the story of how they got around all of that. So they finally finished the film, and you'll learn about that. Then they put out the word, anyone who advertises this film will never get another ad. Any distributor who shows this film in their theater will never get another MGM picture, will never get another Paramount picture. Any projectionist, because the projectionists all over the country were unionized, will be kicked out of the union for projecting this film.
Unbelievable.
So they found brave people to show it, but essentially it was never shown in more than 12 theaters in the entire country.
Until a certain point?
Well, it was never shown beyond the first few months in this country. It was never shown in a major theater. 16-millimeter prints were made, and it began an underground life in union halls and among Mexican-American people and in progressive circles all over the country.
Like Amherst Cinema on August 22nd.
The word got out. Anyhow, the story of what happened to the film later, why it's still considered a classic, it was actually inducted by the Library of Congress into the National Film Registry in
How ironic.
1992. I'm hoping people will come. I do these talks to promote Amherst Cinema. I'm a volunteer. I want you to come. I want you to learn, but I also want you to support Amherst Cinema, which I think is a cultural treasure here in the Valley. I don't want to live somewhere where I can't see the kind of films that they show at Amherst Cinema.
Nina Kleinberg, is it the history? You're an incredible storyteller, by the way. And is it the history that compels you to be volunteering and doing these things, or is it the film aspect of it?
Well, in this particular case, it's the history. And I want to explain a time in America's political life that both suppressed this film but made it possible. The other talks I give, because I love film craft, I still make films, I love film history, I love everything there is about it, and I like to share what I know.
Yeah, I am sensing a slight difference in tone between this film, Salt of the Earth, and Singing in the Rain. Is a little nuanced difference.
I will tell you right now, Gene Kelly was blacklisted from Singing in the Rain, as was Betsy Blair, his wife. We can talk about Casablanca. Howard Koch, the writer, was blacklisted. Every one of these films that we revere were made by people who were eventually prosecuted by the government.
As Lena said in Singing in the Rain, I can't stand it.
And there is more on this Hollywood 10 in a new film coming out, Trumbo, starring Bryan Cranston, who people may know from HBO or whatever that station was.
AMC,
Breaking Bad. Right. And it looks fantastic.
Yes, it's opening, I think, in November.
Yeah.
I just saw the previews for it, and I'll be there opening night.
Right. Why are these stories that are coming to light now? Is there anything particular that is making them all rise up at this point? You know, your talk this weekend, and then
my talk,
Trumbo?
I don't think my talk I've given many times before. I've never given it at Amherst Cinema, but I've developed this talk about 2 or 3 years ago, and I've given it to various local organizations. I think those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it, and unfortunately, even those of us who do remember the past seem to be living through a repetition. But I think the story is still important to be told.
I think it's very important to be told, and I will certainly be there, and can't wait to hear your talk. So you've been volunteering for with Amherst Cinema for how long?
I started last year. I gave the Casablanca talk, and that was a great success. So then I've given 3 talks this summer.
Yeah. Amherst Cinema is a treasure, isn't it?
And you said you make films still. Are they films that people can see?
I make films as a volunteer. I've made pro bono films for local nonprofits. No, I have an entirely separate career that we don't have to go into, but I make films for my own pleasure now.
Nice. So tell us a little bit more. What time on August 22nd will this talk begin?
The talk begins at noon on August 22nd. That's this coming Saturday. And then the film will be shown at 1:30 and at 2:30.
And is this a one-time only?
The talk or the films?
The talk.
I will happily give this talk to other organizations. I'm very easy. All you got to do is ask.
Oh, that's great. Well, this has been a pleasure. Nina Kleinberg, it's great to meet you, and I'm going to learn a lot, not only from today's discussion, but on Saturday when I come and hear that talk at noon at Amherst Cinema. Please come and support this treasure we have in Amherst Cinema. This is Buz Eisenberg sitting in for Bill Newman. Goodbye, Nina.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, Monty.
See you tomorrow, Buzz.